You should trade for these players on your fantasy football teams, especially if you need help at running back or wide receiver. And let's start with Jackson Smith-Njigba. And Jackson Smith-Njigba obviously came off of a week where he had 16 targets, and we were looking at that and being like, oh man, JSN's finally arrived, right?
Oh.
He's definitely going to have it. And then you look at his performance in this week, and you're like, 3 catches for 39 yards, man. Like, what happened? But there's a lot of context behind this, and there's a reason why this is the cheapest JSN is going to be for the rest of the year. And the main reason is, in terms of like percentage of offensive snaps, JSN is getting the most opportunity. This last week, he had the most opportunity than he's ever had in his entire career. And when you're looking at that stacked up against DK and Lockett, he ran more routes than DK. He had more snaps than DK.
Ooh.
He was not only out snapping and out running DK, and Tyler Lockett. I mean, it was both of those guys. He was the leading receiver from an opportunity standpoint. And yeah, he didn't get the targets, but the fact that he's playing that much and they're still increasing his role tells you all you need to know, because you know the talent is there for JSN. Anybody who has followed JSN from college on knows that the talent is there. And when you're looking at that game specifically, playing against the Dolphins, a decimated Dolphins offense, didn't do much on Sunday at all. The Seahawks scored on 3 of their first 4 drives and then didn't do anything after that.
The game was over.
The game was over, and so they didn't really need JSN to do anything. But again, he played 47 of 50 snaps in 11 personnel. This is per PFF, and 9 of 13 snaps in 12 personnel. And again, he led the team in both of those statistics. Tyler Lockett is obviously getting healthier, but the Seahawks offense has looked fairly good as a whole, as a unit to start the year. And when you're considering the role and the amount of work that they're giving JSN in one of those good offenses, I think that's absolutely reason to go buy JSN. My opinion is that JSN is going to be on the rise from this point on. I'm a heavy JSN believer. I always have been. But again, the Seahawks are showing that they invested in JSN in the first round for a reason. They're going to continue to give him more work, and I think the targets will follow. I don't think every game is going to be like this one. And for JSN, even though he didn't really do anything today in fantasy football, I definitely am going to go buy him if you need even flexible production in your wide receiver position. I think he's a great flex every single week. Obviously, 7 points is not going to be done. Really, 6.9 points this week, which is nice. But obviously, that's not going to get done every week. Totally understand that. I do think JSN's a good buy candidate. I would go send some offers for him. In terms of guys I would send for JSN, let's go ahead and look. I think he's going to be valued a little bit below this. But Tank Dell, I would send for JSN. Jameson Williams, I would send for JSN. Ramondre Stevenson, I would send for JSN. Rashad White, I would send for JSN. Michael Pittman, I would send for JSN. That's sad, right?
Rip.
Mason, I would send for JSN. Brian Thomas, I would send for JSN. So there are some guys in that range that I would send for Jackson Smith-Njigba straight up. And maybe you can get a 2 for 2 to kind of balance out that deal. But I think Jason's a good trade target for your team.
Yeah, a lot of you guys are wondering what running backs should we be buying right now, because you've got your top end guys that are just kicking butt. They're untouchable, and then there's not many guys after that you can trust on a week to week basis. And Josh Jacobs is kind of one of those guys that a lot of people are in limbo about, and I would encourage you to not be in limbo. Do not do the limbo with Josh Jacobs. I think you should totally be good with what Josh Jacobs' outlook is going to be for the rest of the season, because Malik Willis is not going to be the starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers much longer. In fact, Jordan Love looks like he's trending to be starting in week 4. And when you're looking at Jacobs' production in week 3, I honestly think whatever Emmanuel Wilson did was fool's gold. 10 of those points came from one play, literally. He had a run or a reception for a touchdown. He had a reception for a long touchdown. And then he got 12 carries to Josh Jacobs' 14. And you're like, oh no, there's no one else in that backfield. A.J. Dillon's out. Marshawn Lloyd's on IR. Emmanuel Wilson's the next man up, and he's looking better than all of them, and now he's out producing Josh Jacobs. What are we going to do? Josh Jacobs was banged up going into this game. Not to mention Malik Willis. Again, Malik Willis is only good for one thing, and that's his rushing ability. That's his mobility. And he had 6 carries for 73 yards in this game and had a rushing touchdown. So you take into account Emmanuel Wilson's fluky receiving touchdown and Malik Willis, who's a backup quarterback that won't be starting for them for the foreseeable future, is taking a touchdown as well in this game. I think we're kind of panicking about nothing. I mean, look at Josh Jacobs' usage the first 2 games of the season. 16 attempts, 84 yards. Efficient, right? The big thing with Jacobs going into the season was, he's going to get the volume, but is he going to be efficient and is he going to get touchdowns? Because he didn't in Vegas in 2023, and that was understandable. Better offense, he was efficient, 5.25 yards per carry game 1. Colts defense, gets 32 carries, runs all over him, 130 yards, fumbles a goal line carry where he was going to get a touchdown, and still 4.7 yards per carry. This game, banged up, 3 yards per carry. Didn't really have to do much because Tennessee was losing the game on their own. Green Bay didn't even have to do that much. Yeah, they scored a lot of points, but Tennessee was giving the ball away. Levis was giving the ball away. Jacobs is going to be fine. Jacobs is one of the better weapons in that offense that they're going to continue to lean on. And when they actually have a viable pass offense again with Jordan Love coming back, I think it's going to be game over. I think Josh Jacobs is gonna come back, and I think he's gonna have a really, really productive season. I think you're gonna see his efficiency come back again, like you saw in the first 2 weeks of the year. He's gonna come back healthier. He's gonna be totally fine. Don't worry about it. I honestly think that he's in one of the better situations in the league for a running back of his caliber to be in to be productive.
And when you're looking specifically for Josh Jacobs at the running back usage on in different situations on the field, he's obviously outplays. He's out snapping all plays. He's out snapping Emmanuel Wilson, 33 to 26 in this game. Early downs, they're about split, which is what you'd expect because the goal line, you've got 3-1 for Jacobs. Short yardage is both Jacobs, and third down 6-4 for Jacobs. So what we know from this is Josh Jacobs is still on the field for the snaps that are going to produce fantasy points. It's going to be third downs, passing situations, and goal line carries. Goal line carries is a big one because touchdowns or bust for running backs. And who's the touchdown? Who is the touchdown running back in this offense? It's Josh Jacobs. And so, again, everybody knew, like Nathan said, that Jordan Love being out was going to hurt Jacobs. And now, people didn't bake that into his price. His price has decreased. You can go trade for him.
Well, I mean, that's the crazy thing, too, is it's not touchdown or bust with Jacobs. He didn't score a touchdown in the first 2 weeks against Philly and Indy, and he still had over 10 points, over 12 points in both of them.
Exactly. So when you add in that he is the one getting the goal line carries, it makes him even more of a buy. So
I would give him a break week 3, especially that game was over almost before it started.
And again, I mean, Matt LaFleur's a genius. He completely changed their offense to tailor it around Malik Willis.
Yeah.
When they get back to the Jordan Love offense, you're going to see an increased role for Josh Jacobs, and you're going to see an increase in production as well because you're going to get more touchdowns. So let's jump over now to Jordan Addison, who played in week 1, only had 6.5 points on 4 targets, and then hasn't played since, right? But what you've seen from the Vikings and what we've seen, and that makes us feel a lot better about Jordan Addison moving forward and makes him a good buy for your fantasy teams, is that Jalen Nailor, of all players, who is a second-year player out of Michigan State, scored 14 points last week. He had 9 points in week 1 and then 12 points in week 3. A lot of people are going to use this to say, well, Nailor, actually, he's going to be a good waiver pickup. But the reality is when Jordan Addison comes back, he has that wide receiver 2 position on lock. And Jordan Addison's better than Jalen Nailor. And he's better than Brandon Powell as well, who has been filling in at the slot for the Minnesota Vikings. And Powell hasn't done anything of worth for fantasy purposes, but Nailor has. And Nailor has had a touchdown in each of his 3 games. And the thing with Jordan Addison going into this year is we were looking at his production last year, and the main thing we're looking at is like, Addison, he's a key candidate for regression because he had 10 touchdowns last year. Mm-hmm. And that was a totally valid point. But we way baked it into his price. And then he was being drafted like at wide receiver 48 prices, which was too low in my opinion. And now he's dropped down rankings because he hasn't played.
Yep.
And with Addison, I think now that we have confidence that this offense is going to be not only competent moving forward, but thrive. Sam Darnold is showing that he's more capable than any of us thought. And yeah, you're going to say Sam Darnold always starts well and then he falls off. Yeah, maybe that's true. But it's been pretty consistent every single week. He's had 24 to 28 attempts every week. He's had 17 to 19 completions every week. He's had 2 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks, and he had 4 touchdowns, which means he's good in the red zone, which is also good for Addison this week. And
like one of the best coaches in the league as opposed to being under Matt Rule.
Look,
Carolina.
Do I think Sam Darnold's going to continue this pace of play all year? No. But do I think he's good enough for J. Jeff to perform and then whoever the second option there, which is clearly Jordan Addison when he's back to perform? Yep. I do, and I think that Jordan Addison is cheap enough right now to where if you send trade offers for him, I think you're going to get have some pretty good luck. And when I'm looking at Addison rest of the season, even the experts on Flock, like when you're looking at the consensus, they have him next to Christian Kirk, Rashid Shaheed, Deontay Johnson, Najee Harris, Pacheco, Shakir, Swift, Moss, Singletary, Javonte, Jerome Ford. In my opinion, I think Addison's a tier above all those guys.
Yeah.
I think he could be a tier production-wise above all those guys, especially with the offense being better than we thought it would be. And so with Addison, I'm willing to go send any of those guys I just mentioned for him. And if you say, oh, okay, nobody's taking that for Addison, okay, well, let's keep going here. Terry for Jordan Addison, I would do. Jonathan Brooks, if you can get Addison for Brooks, like, I'm doing that. I think there are a lot of guys even up here. Like I said, Rashid is ranked above him. Christian Kirk is ranked above him. Deontay Johnson's ranked above him. I would take him over all those guys. And so I think he's a good trade target. I think you can get him cheap right now. I think he's probably going to come back next week, and that's good. But on a Minnesota Vikings offense that's been surprisingly good this year, Jordan Addison projects to be a pretty productive fantasy player when he comes back on the field. Do us a huge favor. If you haven't already, drop a like on this video and make sure if you haven't subscribed, you do that. Those are two things that really tell us that we're doing an okay job, and it really helps support the channel. So appreciate you doing those two things for us. Let's get back to the video.
I think Davante Adams is just going through a little stretch right now that's kind of rough. And you've seen this in the past with Davante, right? He has a couple of rough stretches and then he puts up 35 and then he's dominant and he's always going to get the volume, right? I mean, he had a tough game against Carolina where that offense looked a lot different than it did the first 2 weeks of the season because Bryce Young was no longer the starting quarterback there and it was Andy Dalton. I think Vegas was kind of all out of sorts and they did put literally everything on the line beating Baltimore last week. I think they're a little bit fatigued, and it was just kind of an off week. So expect Davante Adams to bounce back, but also I do want to just look more into this because the reason you're going to have people that may be low on Adams is look at the target volume between these three receivers in Vegas this week against Carolina. You had Trey Tucker with 9 targets, 7 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. He was the leading receiver with 19 fantasy points, and then Jacoby Myers, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 62 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion as well. Davante Adams, 9 targets, 4 receptions for 40 yards. The one disadvantage to being one of the best wide receivers in the league is you are constantly being double teamed. And with Adams, that's going to result in a couple dud games like this because all that focus is going to be on him. It's going to open up the field for randos like Tucker and, decent receivers like Jacoby Myers. But with Adams, let me look at 2023 here because in weeks 5 through 9, he had a very similar stretch here. He had 4, 5, 12, 7, and 7 targets where he only scored 6, 3, 9, 1, and 5 points. And, he does fine. He's a little more consistent the rest of the season. And, he has a couple 35-point games before he has that rough stretch in 2023. Finishes as a low-end wide receiver 1. And with Adams this year, Gardner Minshew throwing him the ball. I mean, Minshew threw the ball 28 times this game. In the first 2 weeks, he threw 33 times and 38 times. There's plenty of volume to go around. Bowers had a rough day this week. I don't think that's going to last either. I think he's going to continue to be on the up and continue to be productive. Again, this was kind of just a fluky week for Vegas, and they kind of just drew the short straw in a matchup that was overlooked. Again, I don't want to overlook the difficulty of facing a team that has so many changes, and, Carolina's still probably going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year.
They will be.
And they're not going to put up 36 points every single week. So expect this to kind of be a fluky week for Vegas as a whole. And you know who Davante Adams is. He has not shown any signs of regression. He hasn't shown any signs of talent regression either, right? I mean, you just saw that sideline catch in week 2. He's going to be totally fine. Go buy him at a discount if you can, because he's always going to be discounted as a result of the situation just being a negative and being viewed in a negative light overall.
One of the biggest takeaways I had from the Panthers absolutely sucking in the first 2 weeks was like, oh, crap. When Jonathan Brooks comes back, man, he is going to have absolutely no chance to do anything. And then in week 3, we saw just how bad Bryce Young is because Andy Dalton, of all people, 14-year NFL veteran at this point. He's been playing since I was 11 years old. He came in, made that offense a little bit more dynamic against the Raiders D. That's not bad. But 25 points this week for Chuba Hubbard because he had 21 attempts. He got the workload there that you want to see from a guy like that. 114 yards, 5.4 yards per carry. But he also had 5 targets and 5 receptions after having 5 targets and 4 receptions the game before. And the main thing that I want to point out to you is from a fantasy football perspective, when Jonathan Brooks comes back, I feel a little bit better now. I at least know that he's going to have this type of ceiling because when Jonathan Brooks does come back, the Panthers are going to give him the ball. At the very least, he's going to be splitting with Chuba, but I think he's considerably better than Chuba. I think they know that. I think that's why they drafted him. And I think now, look, the Panthers are clearly delusional enough to think that they have something this season because otherwise they wouldn't have benched Bryce Young. If you really think that you're not going to do anything this season, you leave Young in there to get reps and you see if he can actually develop as a QB, which at this point, I'm not quite sure he can at all. But clearly Dave Tepper thinks, we could do something. We have to save our season with Andy Dalton. And so if they're operating from that standpoint, with that frame of mind, their best chance at winning is going to come with Jonathan Brooks on the field getting a lot of touches because Jonathan Brooks is that talented of a player. And you'll remember when they were putting Jonathan Brooks on the PUP list, they were actually considering not even doing that. And they said he's probably not going to be back until week 3 or 4. That's when they said. I have a little bit of breaking news here for you. It's week 4. And
Ooh.
after this week, my guess is you see Jonathan Brooks comes back.
Yeah.
And look, is Jonathan Brooks going to get the 21 carries that Chuba got in his first week back? No. Is he going to get in his second week back? Probably not. But when you are supposed to be winning games in fantasy football, and that is at the end of the year, you're going to have Jonathan Brooks with 5 to 7 games under his belt. He's going to come in. He's going to get this type of workload. And yes, is his ceiling going to be capped? Absolutely. It's still a bad offense. Today didn't change that. His ceiling is going to be capped. But the fact of the matter is the running back landscape in fantasy football right now is an absolute mess. It's awful. And a number of these guys, I would send for Jonathan Brooks just for playoff time. If you have the depth to do it at running back, obviously. It's all team dependent. But Pacheco, if people still, Pacheco has some value. Brooks. Swift, I'd send for Brooks. Zach Moss, I'd send for Brooks. Singletary, I'd send for Brooks. Javonte Williams, I'd send for Brooks. Ford, I'd send for Brooks. Mostert, Brooks. Warren, Brooks. Zamir White, Brooks. Elliott, Brooks. Am I off base here? At all?
Brooks.
It's Brooks, right?
Yeah.
Because
it's worth the shot. Like at that rate, those are guys that you're disgusted if you're starting.
You don't want to start those guys. And Jonathan Brooks could be a guy that you feel decent about starting every week, right?
Right.
So, look, do I think it's risky buying Jonathan Brooks? Yes, of course it's risky. But how much risk are you actually putting into this type of buy when you're trading away Zamir White? When you're trading away Raheem Mostert?
Yeah.
You're not.
Yeah.
You're really not. I mean, if he misses, it's not going to be a detriment to your team because he's so cheap. Right. And it's all about price. And at this price, I'll take my chances on an offense now where, yes, it's still not good, but I know a running back can produce, and it is better with Andy Dalton, and that's the main thing that we learned this week. And that's why Jonathan Brooks, in my opinion, if you're struggling at running back or you're worried about your running back depth for a season, so for example, if you have Zach Charbonnet right now as your running back too, and you know Zach Charbonnet is probably not going to be doing what he did this week every week of the season, but you could go get a Jonathan Brooks, I'm doing it. I absolutely do that. So Jonathan Brooks, I feel like, again, if you can buy low on him before he comes back, you do it.
Yep. I would also bet on a guy, on a receiver who's averaged just over 9 targets per game in the first 3 weeks with Caleb Williams. And that's DJ Moore. He's had 8 targets, 10 and 10 against Tennessee, Houston, and Indy. They had a nice little AFC South stretch there. But look, DJ Moore has honestly had a pretty decent floor for getting that volume and not scoring any touchdowns. He's had 7.5, 8, and 11 points respectively in those games with no touchdowns, and Caleb Williams not throwing his first touchdown until week 3. Until he played the Colts secondary, right? So with DJ Moore, look, I think he has shown and demonstrated in these first 3 weeks that he is the number one option this year for Caleb Williams. Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams long-term, we can talk about that later. Keenan Allen, obviously commanding like 11 targets in his first game with Williams, but now he's been out for 2 weeks. We don't know how much longer he'll be gone. Look, Keenan Allen's probably going to be in and out of the lineup for the entire season. DJ Moore is the most consistent option there, and he demonstrated that with way less competent quarterback play in Justin Fields in 2023 and finished as a wide receiver 1. I think DJ Moore is very capable of putting up wide receiver 2 production with Caleb Williams throwing the ball over 30 times a game, right? Which is way more than Fields did. And yeah, more competition with Odunze and Keenan Allen. But to me, that just... When you watch those games for two guys that have watched the Bears play a significant amount the first few weeks of the season because we've been very curious what that whole situation is going to be long term, DJ Moore looks like the number one top option. They're looking for him pretty much every single play. And again, you're seeing that in the targets, the consistent targets, the consistent snap share, the consistent opportunity. Yeah, some of those are like possession targets where you're not going to get a ton of yardage from some of those receptions. But I don't care when he's shown in the past that he's capable of turning anything into a touchdown. It's only a matter of time, guys. It's only a matter of time. I hate the offense overall. I hate the situation. I cannot stand Shane Waldron as an offensive coordinator. I've seen DJ Moore. I've seen DJ Moore produce in worse situations. I'm betting on him being able to transcend, and I'm betting on you being able to get him at a discount right now because of how disappointing he's been and where he was going at price before the season started, right? He was going in the early 4th, late 3rd. Like he's definitely not that price now. That is for a fact. And again, if you want to bet on anything, bet on volume. I mean, we bet on volume with Amari Cooper, saying that he was going to be able to come back and probably, have some pretty big games, even though he disappointed first 2 weeks of the year. DJ Moore is going to be able to do the same thing.
And the last one we have here is going to be a quarterback buy. If you do need quarterbacks, we didn't have any tight ends this week because I think you're better off streaming tight end than anything. If you're in a tight end situation right now, it's not very good.
You have Dallas Goedert.
I mean, apparently so, but whatever.
Not in week 2, apparently.
No, not in week 2.
Gosh.
When you needed him. But Dak, look, the Cowboys pretty much always start slow. We talked about this with CD, and it's kind of the same situation. He did have 29 points last week, but I think you're still going to be able to buy low on Dak. And Dak played the Cleveland defense, the Saints defense, and then the Ravens defense in the first 3 weeks. Looking at this next couple matchups, obviously you've got Pittsburgh in week 5, but you've got Detroit, you've got the Giants, you've got San Fran, you got Atlanta, Philly, again, Houston, Washington, and then in the playoff time, it's the Giants, it's the Bengals, it's the Carolina Panthers, it's the Buccaneers, who just gave up to like 20-something points to the Broncos, and then it's Philly again. Philly gives up a ton of points to quarterbacks, and so he's going to get better as the season goes on. He's going to be productive. I honestly feel like he's a safe option right now, and I feel like you can get him pretty cheap. In terms of who I would trade for Dak Prescott from a quarterback perspective, Purdy, Goff, Love, Baker, Lawrence, Caleb Williams, I would trade for him. I honestly would probably move Joe Burrow for him. That may be a hot take, but I think I would take Dak over Burrow rest of the season. Do you think so? And then, the rushing upside guys like Richardson and Daniels, I think you hold on to. But I think Dak's a good buy if you need a quarterback. And again, I think with tight end, if you need a buy there, I can't really think of anybody. Maybe you could get a discounted Kittle because he's injured. So maybe he's a buy, but outside of that, like I think it's so bad right now, guys. It's so bad. I mean, Sunday Night Football's going on. And
Ingram's looking unstartable.
So is Andrews looks unstartable. Likely is unstartable. Like they're not doing anything. Ferguson is honestly, I mean, maybe, but like Njoku's hurt. Goddard is obviously a product of circumstance, right? Yeah. So at tight ends just ugly. I think you stream. But there you go. Those are some buy candidates for your team. If you need help with your fantasy football team, you can go buy these guys. We can also give you some specific buys for your fantasy football team when you get a team blueprint. You can get them at flockfantasy.com/domain. You get one for free with the annual Mother Flocker tier. You get all of our tools for all fantasy football season and the offseason leading up into the draft next year. And you get a free team blueprint with the annual Mother Flocker tier using code domain. Like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. Links down in the description and in the pinned comment if you want a team blueprint for your team. But we appreciate you guys. Make sure you drop a like, make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you later.